The Edmonton Oilers are set to take on the Florida Panthers in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final. That's not until Saturday. There's a whole lot to discuss. Let's get to work, Oilers fans.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I've been doing hockey content for almost seven years now. I've been a member of the Locked On Network for almost 3 full NHL seasons now, and man, it's been quite the trip working the Oilers show on the way to a Stanley Cup Final. Before we get to today's show, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So today's episode, this is the fun stuff. This is where we can indulge in narratives. We can talk about what it all means. And we have an entire week to talk about tactics, matchups. We'll have some guests throughout the week to kind of give you some flavor, get you some better understanding of the Panthers if you've only been watching the Western Conference. So to start out, the first segment, we're going to hone in on the best player in the world, and we're going to talk about Connor McDavid and getting here and what this means for him and what this means for him as a person. Second segment, we're going to talk about the magic that is a long playoff run, the type of stuff that it takes to go right, the types of bounces, and why this is what really makes you feel alive. And then third segment, we're going to do 10,000-foot drop-down view of this series against the Panthers. Not a lot of detail, just a rough outline, some thoughts, some ideas, something to kind of get the gears turning, to give you something to think about. A whole lot of time to get to matchups and the serious stuff. But today, I really want to talk about Connor McDavid and his journey to get here. The Wonder Kid athlete is one of the more unique phenomena of human culture in the 21st century. We are so emotionally and culturally invested in the success of teenagers, literal children, people who are high school or college age, staking our emotions and our happiness and our money, frankly, buying tickets, buying jerseys, wagering, if that's your thing, on the outcomes of these literal children. I have read a lot of stuff a lot of features, a lot of columns over the years about what it's meant to Connor McDavid to get here. I pulled some of the more, I don't want to say emotional because that's not the right word, but more impactful, powerful, just how much it's meant to him and why it is so incredibly awesome to be here to experience this. The amount of respect I have for Connor McDavid, the hockey player, it sounds silly to say the amount of respect I have for a hockey player is this is the best hockey player I've ever seen. I'm 27 years old. I did not see Wayne Gretzky. I did not see Mario Lemieux. I didn't see Bobby Orr. I didn't see Gordie Howe. Young Sidney Crosby, pre-concussions, was the best player I'd ever seen. Connor McDavid, right now, is better than what's pre-concussion Sidney Crosby was. Would I like to see what pre-concussion Sidney Crosby would look like in today's NHL, where there's a lot more space, the defensemen are smaller, and there's a lot less clutching and grabbing, and it's more predicated on skill as opposed to size? Yes, I would. Connor's the best hockey player I've ever seen, and the journey to get here, it hasn't been easy on him. And I know it's very easy, especially if you do not care about the Oilers. There are a lot of people who are rooting on Connor McDavid's downfall because they view him as an antisocial robot. They view him as, that guy, he's really good at hockey, but he has no personality. He's this, he's that. Some of that is rooted in jealousy, and some of that is rooted in just not knowing. So I pulled a few things I wanted to touch on this first segment. So number one, there's an anecdote about Connor McDavid as a 17-year-old when he was still playing for the Erie Otters, staying after game to sign autographs for every kid that was there. There were probably, I think if I remember the excerpt right, there were about 50 kids waiting, and he signed for every single one of them. Pucks, jersey, stick, whatever. He signed for every single one of them. And someone pulled him aside and said, Connor, you don't have to do that, right? You can just leave. And as a 17-year-old, Connor McDavid said, I was a kid too one time. And then this one I only just saw today. And I think this speaks to how much he's wanted this his entire life. When he was 5 years old, when Connor McDavid was 5 years old, he asked his parents if they could write a letter to Sidney Crosby, who was 15 years old. Mind you, Sidney Crosby was not playing professional hockey. He was not on the World Junior radar yet. Sidney Crosby was 15 years old. Sidney Crosby was the next wonder kid at that point. McDavid was 5 years old. He wanted his parents to help him write a letter to ask Sid how he handles with the pressure and the responsibility upon him. 5 years old. 5 years old, and Connor McDavid was already thinking about how much pressure he was under to be the next great guy. And then this one I relate to a lot. These are from the 2012 and 2013 seasons. He tweeted, quote, always cool watching the Stanley Cup presented, but at the same time, it makes me so jealous. And then, is it just me, or does every other kid get jealous when the Stanley Cup is awarded? Congrats to the LA Kings, #dreams. Connor McDavid has waited his entire life to get here. There must have been a creeping part of him, inside of him, in his subconscious that was worried that he might never get here. There might have been. And look, I know world-class athletes are wired differently than the rest of us. They have the ability to manage their insecurities and their worries a little bit better than us lay people, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to do what they do. I do wonder if there was a part of Connor McDavid that was worried he would never get to this point, that he would never get a chance to even play for a Stanley Cup, let alone win one. There are a lot of great players in this sport who've gotten just here once. You talk about Joe Thornton, you talk about Henrik Lundqvist, Patrick Marleau. There are a lot of really talented players who've gotten to this point and never got back again. There are a lot of guys who don't even get here to begin with. I know every fiber of Connor McDavid's being, probably since he's cared about hockey, which, based on the anecdote I told you about 5 years old, we're probably talking as a 3-year-old when he started to have a conscious memory and probably some baseline understanding of what it meant to play hockey. We're talking about almost his entire life dedicated to getting to this moment. And look, I know every professional athlete, their journey starts young. You can't get to the professional ranks without some natural born fire inside of you to drive you, to motivate you, to get you to that next point. But this is what it takes to be the best player in the world. And look, I know Nathan McKinnon's going to win the Hart Trophy at the end of the month in Vegas at the awards. I know Austin Matthews has won a Hart Trophy a couple times. This is the best hockey player in the world, and he is not going to allow this opportunity to slip through his fingers. Might the Oilers lose? Yes. We're not going to get into the weeds on the series yet because there's a whole week to talk about it, but I know Connor McDavid is going to do everything in his power as a player and as a leader to both carry his team in terms of their on-ice results and have them mentally prepared, because he damn well knows he might never get back here again. And then coming up next, we are going to talk all about why this playoff run is what the sport is all about and why it makes winning the Stanley Cup all the more satisfying. So stick around. It is winner take all time here in the National Hockey League. Oilers, Panthers. Then over in the NBA Finals kicking off this weekend as well. Mavericks, Celtics, Kyrie Irving going back to Boston. If you're interested, we got a series price. The Oilers are plus 108 to win the series. The Panthers are minus 1.5 games, meaning to win the series by more than 2 games. The series is priced at minus 188 to go over 5.5 games. So the odds makers figure this to be a very close series. And if you want to get in on the action, you have got to go check in with our friends at FanDuel, where new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. To all the everydayers who make Locked On Oilers the first part of your day, thank you oh so much. Whether you are on the way to work, on the way to school, at the gym, or at the end of the day, on the way home after a long day, thank you for taking the time. When your team is good, you can't get enough content. I know as a fan, when my team is great, I want to listen to every podcast. I want to read every column. I want to see as much content as possible about how good my hockey team is, about how good my team is, and how good of a decision I am making to spend my time watching it. Speaking of making good decisions and spending your time watching it, this Oilers playoff run is a perfect encapsulation of why this trophy is so hard to win. Sure, they handled the Kings in relatively short order. The Kings, not a perfect team, but I thought the Kings would at least win one more game in that series. So you handle business early, you beat them in 5. You play Vancouver, who's down to a goalie who had 11 career NHL starts going into that series. And Arthur Shelovs plays great. You are on the ropes. You are down 3-2, and you do not have any breathing room. Your coach looks down the bench and says, our goaltender, our starter, Stuart Skinner, he is not giving us enough of a chance to win. We got to change something. So what are we going to do? We're going to go to Calvin Pickard, who has not been a full-time NHL starter in 7 years. And what do you know, Chris Knobloch? It works. You win with Calvin Pickard as a starting goalie in an NHL playoff game. Calvin Pickard had never started in an NHL playoff game before that series against Vancouver. Not only does Chris Knobloch push that button correctly, he says, okay, I can't keep playing Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci together. They're killing us. So what are we going to do? We're going to break them up. We're going to make our alternate captain, who makes a lot of money, Darnell Nurse, a third-pair defenseman. We're going to cut his minutes by 2 or 3 in all situations, and we are going to reduce his workload, and that's going to make us a better team. We're dealing with injuries up front. Okay, if we can't play Adam Henrique, who's drawing in? Are we playing Sam Carrick? Are we playing Matthias Janmark? Who are we playing to fill that in? Okay, I don't think we can play Ryan McLeod in this game. And then in the Dallas series, you scratch Ryan McLeod the one game, he comes back and he scores a goal. You get a shorthanded goal from Matthias Janmark. You got a Game 7 goal from Cody Ceci in the Vancouver series. When you are getting goals from those types of players, when you are going to get a win from a backup goalie who hasn't played in a playoff game ever, that's the type of stuff you need to happen if you're going to make it. And when I say it, I mean the Stanley Cup. That's the beauty of this time of year. It takes everybody. There are no passengers on a team that goes all the way. The Oilers have dressed 20-something players. They've dressed 23 different players. 21 different players have recorded a point. The only 2 players to not record a point in these playoffs, Stuart Skinner, Calvin Pickard. Of those 21 different players, at least 16 have 1 goal. Those are within the numbers you need in comparison to recent Stanley Cup winners like Vegas, Colorado, Tampa Bay, St. Louis, Washington, Pittsburgh, Chicago, etc. You typically need about 20 guys to contribute at least 1 point, and then you need at least 15 guys to give you at least 1 goal. So far, the Oilers are well on pace to get there. That is awfully encouraging. And then the other thing we're going to talk about here, in these playoffs, the Oilers have 5 players who are meeting the point per game threshold. Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Evan Bouchard, Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid. Your 5 best players are meeting the point per game threshold. All of the recent Stanley Cup winners have at least 4 guys who are point per game when the Stanley Cup is awarded. The Oilers have 5. One of those guys in Zach Hyman, his split is 14 goals, 4 assists, and 18 games played. That is awesome. The Oilers stars have delivered and then some. Evan Bouchard is having as good a coming out party in front of a national audience maybe I've ever seen from a defenseman. I know he hasn't gotten Norris buzz yet. This playoff run will get him in that conversation going forward. It will get him the recognition and the name brand status that you need if you want to win awards. It's unfair the way award voting works, especially at Norris and especially Vezina, where if you're not on one of the good teams, if you're not on a crazy good team, you're not going to get recognition. And in the case of Bouchard, people are going to say, oh, he plays with McDavid. He's on the best power play in hockey. And if he has the numbers and he has the impacts, he's a guy. And then the thing I wanted to wrap up this segment with is this is the best trophy in all of sports. This is the most difficult trophy to win in all of sports. If you want to say the World Cup in soccer is harder to win, technically, mathematically, yes, this is harder. I think winning 4 best of 7s is harder than winning 5. I think it's 1, 2, you play 4 games in the group stage and then it gets down to 16. So 4 and then 16, 5, 8, 7. You got to play like 7 games to win a World Cup. You got to win 16 to win the Stanley Cup. And you can't win them in a random order. You got to win at least 4 of the first 7 to get the privilege to play for another 7. I said it the way the Oilers played in Game 4 of this series, coming back to erase a 2-goal deficit after blowing a lead the game before. They showed you championship caliber resolve in that Dallas series. Did Dallas underperform my expectations for them? Yeah, just a little bit. I thought Dallas would be a little bit better. The fact they went scoreless on the power play through 6 games is crazy. Dallas has a lot of really good players, but you tip your cap to the Oilers. The Oilers are putting on one of the best special teams performances in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs. They've killed off 46 of 49 penalties in these playoffs. I don't know what the record is off the top of my head. It is hard to find special team statistics on that level for specifically the playoffs, but at some point this week, I'm going to commission a deep dive and do some statistical analysis and try and find what the record for best penalty kill is with the most penalties killed, because 46 out of 49 is absurd. You add that with the power play that is buzzing. You get 97 the puck in space and say, do what you want, and you make the fulcrum point of the power play entirely fluid wherever McDavid wants to take it. There is nothing you can do about it. Leon said it about the Connor goal, the first one in Game 6. Only player in the world who can do that. Same deal on the power play. Now that we know McDavid is feeling better than he did at the start of the Dallas series and to Vancouver, where he was a little reticent to get hit, a little reticent to go to the net, he looks locked in. He looks awfully determined. You get that going. You tell the best player in the world his first time ever going to the Stanley Cup. And real quick, I wanted to get this in the last segment, but I didn't get a chance to. Speaking of McDavid, at this point, Sidney Crosby went to the Stanley Cup, won the Stanley Cup in his 4th NHL season. He had been to the Cup Final in his 3rd season. He had already won a Hart Trophy at that point. Wayne Gretzky won a Stanley Cup for the first time in his 5th NHL season. He had won 5 Hart Trophies, 5 Art Rosses. There's a reason he's Wayne Gretzky. They lost the year before they won the Stanley Cup. That's true of both Wayne and that's true of Sidney Crosby. And then for Lemieux, he won the Stanley Cup in his 5th NHL season. The Penguins did not make the playoffs the year before that. He had 1 Hart Trophy and he had 2 Art Rosses when that happened. So coming up next, we're going to start. We're not going to fully lay everything out. The dinner's not cooking yet, but we're going to set out the tablecloths. We're going to put out the utensils, the china, maybe a bottle of wine, some champagne, if that's your kind of thing. We're going to set the table for this dinner party that's not getting set till Saturday. Stick around. Coming up next on Locked On Oilers. Thank you very much for hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are getting the table set for the Stanley Cup Final. Now, dinner's not for a while, but company's starting to come over. People are asking, so when are you going to get started on the cooking? And don't you worry, there will be plenty of cooking on Let's Go Oilers this week. let's go Oilers. I'm so used to saying that. Locked On Oilers. There will be plenty of cooking on Locked On Oilers this week. Don't you worry. So, Florida's a good hockey team. Florida is as good as advertised. They're a slight betting favorite in the series on FanDuel. They are supremely talented. They feature at least 2, if not 3, of the 20 best players in the entire world, very similarly to the Oilers. But the Oilers are the one team in these playoffs that can legitimately say our best 2 guys are just as good, if not better, than your best 2 guys. And the Oilers have the luxury that Leon Draisaitl is a center as opposed to Matthew Tkachuk, who's a winger. I know positional value, it doesn't matter a whole lot when we're talking about that highest echelon of player, but Leon does play center. That is slight edge. Florida's good. If you put Sam Reinhart opposite Zach Hyman, those are 2 really good goal scorers who love getting to the net, love stirring things up. You go a tier below that, you get Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and like Carter Verhaeghe. Those 2 guys are both really good. Verhaeghe, a little bit more of a goal scorer. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, a little bit more of a jack of all trades. And then we go to the back end. And I'm going to sound crazy saying this maybe. I think the Oilers might have a slight edge on defense. The Oilers' first pair is more talented than Florida's. I know Florida's defense has a better reputation. They've been a little bit better in these playoffs, but I'm taking Bouchard and Ekholm over Ekblad and Forsling all day. Forsling's having an amazing playoffs. He's scored quite a few goals in these playoffs, which is a little out of character for him. He's more of a defense-first guy. He's one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league. Florida has done a really nice job of cultivating defensive defensemen, whether you talk about him, Mackenzie Weegar, who they traded to Calgary in the Matthew Tkachuk trade. They have done a nice job cultivating defensive defensemen. Then you talk Ekblad, who's had a solid NHL career. I don't know if he's reached the heights that maybe some of us expected him to, winning the, what is it called? Wow. Totally drew a blank on the Calder Trophy. Couldn't remember what the Rookie of the Year award in the NHL was, but you have that. You go down to that second pair, you're talking Brandon Montour. They have Nico Mikkola. They have Dmitry Kulikov. They have Oliver Ekman-Larsson. The Oilers are going to have a decent shot. Talent-wise, this is pretty close. I think Florida's guys might play a slightly better style for playoff hockey in that they're comfortable on the cycle. They're comfortable forechecking. And when the Oilers have been in trouble in these playoffs, it's when the other team has had their cycle and forecheck going. So stylistically, that might be a bit of an issue. But the counterpoint to that, I will say, and saying this as somebody who intently watched the Rangers-Panthers series as a Ranger fan, unfortunately, the Panthers can be hit on the quick strike. Through the first 4 games, the Rangers were holding their own in terms of high danger chances, meaning they were keeping Florida to the outside and they were getting to the net front, and it was 2-2 after 4 games. Everybody knows that. It would have been nice if one of their star players, as opposed to Barclay Goodrow or Alex Wenberg, could have contributed goals to those wins, but the Oilers guys are better. The Oilers, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nuge, I could go on and on. You know who's on the team. Those guys are going to have opportunities in this series. There will be goals scored. If the Oilers are going to win, I imagine this is going to be high scoring, open-ended, not a lot of defense. I don't know if the Oilers are going to be able to win a defensive struggle against Florida purely because of the goaltending. I know Stuart Skinner's coming off of 2 ridiculously good games in really difficult situations, but Bob's got the track record. You can point to his playoff run last year. He's a 2-time Vezina winner. He's a Vezina finalist this year. He's got the calluses. He's got the playoff calluses. He's been in some really difficult situations over the years, and he's persevered, found a way. And I think the Oilers are, I think Florida, I think the Rangers, I would have said Carolina. I don't think there is a team in the Eastern Conference where the Oilers wouldn't have had a shot against. I think they're going to have a very good chance to win this series and win their first Stanley Cup since the 90s. I really do. We're going to talk all about that throughout the course of the week, so I don't want to spoil too much, but these are some stats for you. The Edmonton Oilers have played 18 seasons since they last made the Stanley Cup Final. In those 18 years, they have made the playoffs 6 times. That includes the Fugazi qualifying round of 2020 in the bubble, where they lost to the Coyotes and Taylor Hall. It includes that. They picked first overall 4 times in that 18-year window. If the Oilers went on to win the Stanley Cup, they would have won 4 playoff series this year. They have won 4 playoff series in the previous 18 years combined. This is as golden an opportunity as you're gonna get. Would the Rangers have been a slightly easier matchup? Yeah, the Oilers definitely would have had more opportunities. The Rangers defense is not nearly as good as Florida's, and it was ultimately their undoing. The Oilers defense has shown the ability to play structured, rigid hockey that can not just survive, but it can actively suppress the other team's opportunities on offense. Dallas did not get a whole lot of offense in that series. You know, the Oilers held them to 12 goals over 6 games, 2 goals a game. And everybody, including me, going into the series said Dallas had an advantage on defense and it had an advantage in net. Skinner outplayed Ottinger in those last 2 games. That was the difference. The Oilers don't need Stuart Skinner to be a world beater. If he's slightly above average, Oilers are cooking. I really don't want to mush anything. I don't want to get too excited. I don't want to get everyone's hopes up, but this should be an awesome series. These are 4 of the 20 best players in the world in Draisaitl, McDavid, Barkov, Tkachuk, going at it. 4 of the best players in the world. Barkov and Tkachuk were here last year, and we can be honest, they got their doors blown off. Vegas was great. Vegas was a genuinely great hockey team. I don't think there was anybody in last year's playoffs on the eastern side of the bracket that could have beaten them. That includes the Bruins. Had the best regular season of any team in the 82-game season format. I don't think they could have beaten Vegas last year. Florida is a really, really good team. The Oilers are a really, really good team. This should be awesome. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcast. Leave the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you are watching over on YouTube, hi, hello. Hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification anytime new content goes live. Leave me a comment. If you could tell Connor McDavid one thing going into this series, what would you want to tell him? That'll do it for me. Till tomorrow, let's go Oilers.